The 2022 candidates is over. 8 of the best players in the world, aside from the world champion, competed for 14 rounds. That means that we were treated to a total of 56 stunning games. And it should come as no surprise that in these games, there were dozens upon dozens of brilliant concepts and moves. And so today, we're going to be counting down the top 5 most instructive and brilliant moves from this tournament. Now, I should emphasize that I'm not only going to focus on standalone moves that were super stunning, but also the concepts, plans, and strategies behind those moves, so you can truly not only admire the games, but learn something from them. This is the Chess Geek channel. Subscribe for more videos just like this, and now let's jump into the first move. This was Hikaru Nakamura playing against Liren in round 6. And very early on in the game, we saw some quick trouble for Hikaru Nakamura. White let black get a very dangerous pawn in the center of the board. Look at this d5 pawn here. It is uncontested. It's a passed pawn. There is no pawn for white on the c, d, or e file that could ever stop this pawn from its pretty simple plan to promote. And this is the exact reason why Hikaru got into some very dangerous territory very early on in the game. You see this pawn simply running down the board, and it continues going now to d3, and later, in just a couple of moments, to d2. And this becomes super dangerous. Here, the rook has to slide to d1 to stop the pawn, and now, after rook to d5, black is putting a ton of pressure, and here, Hikaru had to find a brilliant defensive resource to stay alive. Just to illustrate how severe this position really is, let's suppose Hikaru played a random move. Bishop e3, just moving the bishop back and forth. Here, black would be able to win in a number of ways, but for example, one clear path is to go rook a8, rook a1, and then trade off this piece here that is the defending piece for the pawn on d2. At some point, you can certainly also take on e5, a free pawn. The queen had to move, and now let's say rook takes e3, taking away another defensive piece, and after pawn takes, now rook takes d1 check, and if queen takes, then queen c1 will simply win. Of course, now there is no way to defend this queen from the white side, and if you take, black will simply make another queen. And so that is really only one of the ways that black can try to progress this position. So white has to play with incredible urgency, and that is exactly what Hikaru did when he played bishop takes g7. Now, there is suddenly a counter threat of mate, queen h8 for white, and so black cannot continue with their plan, and here, after knight takes g7, a second brilliant move, the reason that bishop takes g7 was played is this strike rook takes g7 check, and suddenly the black king is fully exposed, and now it's no longer about defending from this pawn, it's simply about giving perpetual check, attacking this king over and over again, and black will never be able to get any space or time to continue with their plan. And this is exactly what happened. Queen to g5, queen to h6, and here perpetual check seals the deal. Notice that Ding cannot really be too adventurous. If he goes king to e7, then simply queen to f6 check, and now the king has to return back to f8 and allow for the perpetual again, because if it wanders too far, then there's suddenly going to be some very dire consequences with the queen taking here on f7. So black also has to play pretty precisely, and the game ended in a draw. And so brilliant moves are not only attacking aggressive moves, but also in a very stressful situation. If you're in the defending end of a brutal attack, you have to find these brilliant and stunning ways to stay in the game, and that's exactly what Nakamura did here. Moving on to brilliant move number 2, we have round 10 Duda against Caruana, and in this position, white has a sizable advantage, and the reason for this is because if you look at the minor pieces on the board, both minor pieces, the rooks and queens for both sides, are very strong on the king side, although blacks are playing a defensive role defending this weak and exposed king, while whites are clearly playing a more aggressive role. However, more important than the major pieces is the disparity in minor pieces. If you notice this bishop, it's staring into its own pawns, and this knight is stranded on the complete other side of the board, and that is exactly why these minor pieces pale in comparison to their counterparts, and that is the source of the advantage for white. But you have to act quickly, because if you don't, then suddenly this knight will come into the game, and slowly, maybe through bishop e7, black will consolidate and improve both minor pieces, and no longer will you have that opportunity. And this is why Duda had to strike here, and that is exactly what he did. Knight to h7, insanely brilliant idea. And first of all, it's stunning because no one would consider it. The knight is undefended there. It's not so clear what it's doing and what the purpose of the knight being on h7 really is, but that will be revealed momentarily. First of all, we should point out you can't really take that knight. If you take with the rook, it's mate in 1 and you lose the queen, and if you take with the queen, you hang the rook, because I mean you can trade here, but of course this is very good for white winning material, and so the knight is untouchable. But what happens after simply rook f to g6? The knight was attacking the rook moves. Why did we just play this? Well, rook f to g6 is actually forced, and the whole purpose of this is now black will be forced to trade this rook that was on g3 for the rook that was on f6, and now the knight returns. So white basically played knight h7 as a means to force the trade of the f6 and g3 rooks. So the question now is, why was trading this rook for this rook good? Well, the issue for white was their pieces were very crammed. These two rooks were serving the same purpose on the g-file. This queen was a little squished. It couldn't really get out from h3, and the pieces just didn't have the potential that they needed. But now, with the position being a little bit more open on the king side, black has less defensive resources and pieces, while white's pieces, although perhaps smaller in number, they lost a rook, their pieces themselves now have much more potential, and this becomes abundantly clear if we look at the game continuation. After rook f6, f4 was played. The position opens up, and now, again, because the queen can come into the game, because the rook is no longer stuck behind its other friend here on g3, it has more potential, and in general, the position is much more open, and that helps the white pieces. Here, for example, if you were to take queen f3, wins on the spot, the h5 pawn is gonna be lost, and if, for example, queen to g6 is played, then e5 is a serious threat here, winning material, for example, like this. And so, in general, giving your pieces life is super important, and in this case, that meant playing knight to h7, such a surprising and brilliant idea, and now it's super instructive, and maybe you can implement it into your own games as well. Brilliant move number 3 happened in round 9 between Alireza Firouzja and Rapport. And in this position here, as white, Alireza has a beautiful opportunity. This king is stranded in the center, and this is actually why I'm making my masterclass on positional play, where one of the key concepts is king safety. This game beautifully illustrates why king safety is so important even at the highest level of chess. Here, with the white pieces, your rook is attacked, and therefore the move that immediately comes to mind is moving the rook back, but that is not what was played. Instead, Alireza played queen to g3, putting more pressure into the position, cutting the king, and really inviting the bishop to take the rook. And the reason that Alireza knew this was good for him is because of his understanding of positional concepts, his understanding that if you take, this king is so exposed, without even calculation, you know that this king, that this cannot be objectively good for black. White must have a way to punish this, and indeed, that is true. White is much better here. For example, if rook to g8 was played, passively defending the pawn, then there's even just mate. After rook to e1, you can block with the knight, but ultimately the king will be forced away, and that will allow mate. And this is why the queen eyeing down this diagonal is so critical. As I pointed out earlier, it helps with attacks like this. And so Alireza understood his positional concepts and used those concepts to get more pressure into the position, adding pressure, not caring about material if it means that the black king will just open up. And in fact, after the knight moved to d7, now defending the pawn and attacking the strong bishop that stops the king from castling, again, maybe some people would want to move the rook to safety, but no. A second brilliant move, sacrificing the rook again, but for the same purpose as before. If you take, that will be suicidal, opening up the e-file, and mate will follow in some variation. And so, beautiful positional understanding and showcase here. King safety, super important, and Alireza clearly used that to his advantage. For example number 4, we are going to go back in time to round 1. And this was the game Ding Liren with the white pieces playing against Nepo with the black ones. And this was super important, not only as an individual game, but for the entire tournament, because this was the first round. No one knows who's playing good, who's on their peak performance. And so this game really clarified matters and set Jan up to the future success that he clearly had. And so the game became very tactical in nature super quickly on, pieces flying everywhere. And it was clear, especially with this expansion over here, g5, that black was going for a quick kingside assault on this king here. And that is exactly what happened, sacrificing a rook for the attack. Super brilliant game in total. And we're going to focus, though, on a very specific move, which happened right around here after king takes g2. Now, let me emphasize that there's many ways that are objectively winning to continue here, but there's only one that is a forced mating sequence and truly beautiful. And so I'd urge you to try to pause the video and find it. The move, the spectacular move, is bishop h3 check. And maybe you've already seen this, maybe for me as well, because I have been posting recaps of the most exciting games of this tournament on my TikTok and YouTube clips channel. Links will be in the description if you're interested. So maybe you've already seen this, but we really should still emphasize this because it's truly a gorgeous idea. The whole point is the bishop was cutting the king, but if the king were to try to escape now, it's simply coming towards this huge mass of black pieces. So that's not a strategical thing that will work well for white. And in fact here, after queen h1 check, cutting the king, there will simply be mate. And so, going back, the king more or less has to take. Any other move runs into a similar type of mating idea. I mean, if the king comes to h2, then the queen will also enter in and mate. And so, there's going to be mate if they don't take, but unfortunately, there's mate if you take as well. This was just such a cool concept. If king takes h3, now the queen slides into h1, and after the king moves, you simply go h5. And again, there's multiple ways to go about this, but this is the most exact and precise way. After king to g5, queen h3. And of course, Ding resigned a couple moves earlier, in fact, after bishop h3. But the whole point is after queen h3, mate is unstoppable. I mean, there's a million different mates that are being threatened in this position. The engine gives knight e6 as the best move here, just starting to sacrifice pieces over and over again. And so, I mean, at this point, it's coming into the desperate phase where white is just prolonging their inevitable death, again, with a variety of these checkmating attacks. So a beautiful display here by Nepo that really set him up for his success later on in the tournament. And the moment you've all been waiting for, the most brilliant move from the FIDE Candidates Chess Tournament 2022 happened in round 12 between Ding Liren, again on the receiving end with the white pieces, playing against Radjabov. And in this position, black, of course, has a huge advantage with the pressure along the b-file and the e-file, with the king that is clearly not at its peak safety, and with the two bishop advantage that will become very convertible soon. Black has an undeniable advantage, but there's one super precise way to convert it, and Radjabov found this brilliant concept in the game, one which I urge you to find. This is a truly spectacular move in this position. The move is rook takes e3, And the whole point is, if the king were to take, you drag the king into the position next to all of these pieces, closer to black's camp, and we'll analyze this momentarily. But I should mention, the king doesn't have to take, but after the knight moves, because now there's all sorts of pressure, the rook being super active along both the third rank and the e-file. So the defensive move knight d1 was played to try to defend a little, and, you know, try to cover these hanging pieces. But the issue is, black won a pawn, exploded up the position, and now white was forced to a defensive state even more. And so this simply won't work. The rook temporarily retreated, but then became super active on the c-file, and ultimately, I mean, white just resigned a couple moves later, although they could have done it here as well, because this was objectively a super sound sacrifice, because after king takes follows bishop c5, and I should emphasize, all of these moves are super precise. If you don't play queen to e5 or bishop to c5 in the exact order you play them, black cannot convert this. So Radjabov didn't only find a move that looked kind of interesting and tried to play it, he found the precise and accurate continuation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone for this. And so here, if king to f2 was played, then you lose the knight with check, the king moves, and here there's many ways to go about this. You can sacrifice the rook and then win the knight. Also, this knight activates, the engine shows a million ways to win. And if instead the king tries to come to d3, that won't work well either, because here there is, for example, bishop takes d4 as well. And if the king tries to escape, then you can trade here and give a check, forcing the king back. And here, for example, rook b3 will simply win with a variety of threats in this position. Let's say rook e1, here you can go check, and now the king loses a final defender. The queen will fall momentarily with check and with a devastating continuation, and the game is fully over. So clearly there were some stunning moves and concepts shared in this candidates tournament. Hopefully this video gave you a nice sweet recap of the magical things that occurred in this tournament. Leave down below your thoughts as to which one of these moves you found the most brilliant, and if you think I missed any brilliant moves, leave them down below as well. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss videos just like this. Like this video if you enjoyed and learned something new from it. Check out my chess website where you can find all the content that I'm working on, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.